Welcome back to Intro to Philosophy 1010. In this video, we will be going over Rene Descartes and the questions from Princess Elizabeth to Descartes about his philosophy. So the exam questions for exam 1 we'll be going over is part B, question number 4, 5, and 6. So question number 6 is, why does Descartes imagine that all of our perceptions might be illusions implanted in our minds by a powerful deceiver? What point is he trying to make? So in this writing, Meditation 2 of the nature of the human mind, and that it is more easily known than the body. That's the part of Descartes' work here, Meditations on First Philosophy. So on page 265 of our book, so here's our book, Introduction to World Philosophy, a multicultural reader, and Descartes is picking up from his meditation the day before. So he says in the left-hand column, "The meditation of yesterday filled my mind with so many doubts that it is no longer in my power to forget them." And here's what his strategy was trying to do. He was trying to doubt everything he could possibly doubt to see if he could come to some indubitable, undoubtable truth. And that, in a nutshell, is why he imagines everything that he's experiencing, even his own emotions and his ideas of what is logical. He says, well, in the worst case scenario, it is some great powerful demon forcing me to hallucinate all these things. So I can't trust anything. Is there anything I can believe if I assume that's the case? Yes, there's still one thing I can know for certain, and that is that I exist because I think. I wouldn't be capable of being deceived by some omnipotent deceiver if I didn't exist. I have to be some thinking being in order to be thinking erroneously due to the influence of some evil and malicious demon. So that's, in a nutshell, the answer to that question. But I'll read a little bit here because we're also going, in the next video, I'll be going over part A of the exam 1 question 6, which is where is it? Oh, question 3. So they got a little bit out of order, but which do you prefer, Descartes' definition of a self or Locke's? So we're going over Descartes' definition of what a self is. In a nutshell, it's a thinking thing. That's all he can say a self is. He can't say it's a body. He can't say it's anything other than a thing that thinks. Because even if everything else you can doubt, you can't doubt the fact that you're doubting. And doubting is a form of thinking. Being deceived is a form of thinking. So that's what we are. That's the one truth. So let me just read some selections here on page 265. On the left-hand column at the bottom, he says, "I shall nevertheless make an effort and follow anew the same path as that on which I yesterday entered, i.e., I shall proceed by setting aside all that in which the least doubt could be supposed to exist, just as if I discovered that it was absolutely false. And I shall ever follow in this road until I have met with something which is certain, or at least, if I can do nothing else, until I have learned for certain that there is nothing in the world that is certain." So that is what he's looking for. One certain truth. Even if that certain truth is that there's nothing certain, he wants to discover that. And so he's imagining his body's a fiction. He's saying, well, just from the fact that I've had dreams where I thought I was in a real world, I can't trust anything that I experience. It could possibly be a dream. More than that, he introduces the idea of the deceiver. So on page 266, on the left-hand column, he said, "But I was persuaded that there was nothing in the world, that there was no heaven, no earth, that there were no minds, nor any bodies. Was I not then likewise persuaded that I did not exist? Not at all. Of a surety I myself did exist, since I persuaded myself of something. But there is some deceiver or other very powerful and very cunning." It's a little bit of a strange translation here. "But there is some deceiver or other, very powerful and very cunning, who ever employs his ingenuity in deceiving me. Then without doubt I exist also if he deceives me, and let him deceive me as much as he will, he can never cause me to be nothing so long as I think that I am something." A little later in that paragraph, he says, I am, I exist, is necessarily true each time that I pronounce it or that I mentally conceive it. Over on the page 267, near the top on the left-hand column, he says, but what am I, now that I suppose that there is a certain genius which is extremely powerful and, if I may say so, malicious, who employs all his powers in deceiving me? Still, he's a thinking thing. So we've gone over the basic point. And now I will go on to part B, question 5. Explain Descartes' wax example. What does he say it reveals about the nature of human knowledge? So the wax example starts on page 268 near the top on the right-hand column. He said, let us begin by considering the commonest matters, those which we believe to be the most distinctly comprehended, to wit, the bodies which we touch and see. Not indeed bodies in general, for these general ideas are usually a little more confused, but let us consider one body in particular. Let us take, for example, this piece of wax. All right, so he's holding a lump of wax in his hand. It has been taken quite freshly from the hive, and it has not yet lost the sweetness of the honey which it contains. It still retains somewhat of the odor of the flowers. Its color, its figure, its size are apparent. It is hard, cold, easily handled, and if you strike it with the finger, it will emit a sound. But then he puts it near the fire. Now the odor evaporates. The taste of it goes away. The shape of it goes from a hard lump to softer and flexible. And now, so then he's saying, what then did I know so distinctly in this piece of wax? It could certainly be nothing of all that the senses brought to my notice, since all these things which fall under taste, smell, sight, touch, and hearing are found to be changed, and yet the same wax remains. So he didn't know what the wax is through his sense perceptions. It had a certain smell, you could hear it when you tapped it, it had a certain color. So all of his 5 senses, a certain taste, all of those sense perceptions of the piece of wax, which were informing his mind of what it is, they all changed once he heated the wax up. And then he said, so I'll read here at the bottom of page 268 on the right-hand column. He says, let us attentively consider this, and abstracting from all that does not belong to the wax, let us see what remains. So the color didn't belong to it, the smell, the sound. So what is the wax itself? He says, certainly nothing remains except a certain extended thing which is flexible and movable. But what is the meaning of flexible and movable? So then he says, I can imagine shaping it into an infinite number of shapes, and I can move it and stretch it out to potentially an infinite degree. If you heat it up, it becomes liquid and it covers more surface area. If you boil it, it could fill up a whole lot of water. You could imagine there's no limit to what size it could become or how many shapes it could become. So then he says, I can't even imagine what it is. So I'll read a little bit more. He says, no, certainly it is not that, since I imagine it admits of an infinitude of similar changes, and I nevertheless do not know how to compass the infinitude by my imagination. So imagination, his definition of imagination, if you look on page 267, he says, since to imagine, in the right-hand column, in the middle of that column, he says, since to imagine is nothing else than to contemplate the figure or image of a corporeal thing. So that's what imagination is for him. And if you can't imagine an infinitely extended thing, then it's not falling within the powers of your imagination. So then it has to come in under the power of what he calls your understanding. So I'll just read what he says. No, certainly it is not that, since I imagine it admits of an infinitude of similar changes, and I nevertheless do not know how to compass the infinitude by my imagination, and consequently, this conception which I have of the wax is not brought about by the faculty of imagination. What now is this extension? Is it not also unknown? It could be extended to infinity. So again, he can't imagine infinity. So he therefore says, we must then grant that I could not even understand through the imagination what this piece of wax is, and that it is my mind alone which perceives it. So this is on page 269, the left-hand column, 3/4 of the way down. He says, but what must particularly be observed is that its perception is neither an act of vision, nor of touch, nor of imagination, and has never been such, although it may have appeared formerly to be so, but only an intuition of the mind. So he's getting to the point is, the fact that you can understand what a piece of wax is proves that you are a thinking thing, because it's not, that knowledge is not gained through your sense perceptions, since all of the sense perceptions of the piece of wax changed. So you couldn't know what it is through your sense perceptions. You can't imagine what it is because the wax can be stretched and shaped into so many, infinite variety of ways. So therefore, only the understanding of the rational mind can understand what it is, thereby proving the existence of the mind. So if you look to on the right-hand column of page 269, about 3/4 of the way down, he says, what was there which might not as well have been perceived by any of the animals? But when I distinguish the wax from its external forms, that's the smell and the taste and the sound it makes, and when, just as if I had taken from it its vestments, I consider it quite naked, it is certain that although some error may still be found in my judgment, I can nevertheless not perceive it thus without a human mind. So this is what the wax example is telling you. Continuing down at the bottom of that right-hand column over to the next page, 270, says, for if I judge that the wax is or exists from the fact that I see it, it certainly follows much more clearly that I am or that I exist myself from the fact that I see it. So just any knowledge of the wax proves that he exists as a thinking thing. At the bottom of that left-hand column on page 270, he says, since all the reasons which contribute to the knowledge of wax or any other body whatever are yet better proofs of the nature of my mind. The more you prove that something else exists, the more you prove that your mind exists. That's the preliminary precondition for you to know anything at all. It's the only thing that he's saying can be known absolutely, is that we are thinking things. So on the right-hand column of page 270, he says, but finally here I am, having insensibly reverted to the point I desired, for since it is now manifest to me that even bodies are not properly speaking known by the senses or by the faculty of imagination, but by the understanding only, and since they are not known from the fact that they are seen or touched, but only because they are understood, I see clearly that there's nothing which is easier for me to know than my mind. So that is for part B, question 5. Explain Descartes' wax example. What does he say it reveals about the nature of human knowledge? That the more you know about any objects outside of yourself, what it's really proving is that you exist as a thinking thing. The thing that you're perceiving, the wax, it might be a part of a dream or an idea implanted in your mind by some evil genius. But one thing that you can't doubt, says Descartes, is that you exist. Because even if you doubt everything else, the act of doubting proves that you exist. So, part B, question 4, what is Princess Elizabeth's main question to Descartes about? In other words, what problem does she point out in Descartes' philosophy of the immaterial self? So that's very straightforward, and the introductory notes explain it well enough. Her point is this: if Descartes' definition of a soul, which he didn't explicitly make in the selection that we read from, but Descartes' philosophy is known as dualism. He thinks there's two types of things. There's material objects that are extended in space and they do not think. And then there are thinking things, which are souls, human beings, that have no extension in space. Unextended thinking things are souls, and extended things don't think, and they are matter. So Princess Elizabeth's question is, if a soul has no extension, how does it move the body? Where's the contact point between the two? So on page 271, on the left-hand column, she says, I am asking you to tell me how the soul of man, being only one thinking substance, can determine the spirits of the body to produce voluntary actions. So if your mind says, or your soul says to your body, right arm move, your right arm goes up. Where was the contact point? Because your soul has no extension in space, so it couldn't give a shove to any nerve ending or anything. So where's the point? So she'll go on to say, for it seems to me that all determination of movement is done by an impulse of a moving thing. The way in which a thing is pushed is determined by that which drives it, or by the quality and appearance of surface of the latter. Contact is necessary for the first two conditions and extension for the third. For one thing to move another, they both have to have extension in space. If the soul has no extension in space, then you can't explain how your soul can intentionally move your body, nor can you explain how something that happens to your body can affect your soul. If you burn your hand, you sense pain. That's your soul is experiencing something. Where's this contact point between a soul with no extension and material things that have extension in space? So she just goes over that basic point a few times, and that I think will cover. You can look on that from pages 271 to 274. Okay, so in the next video I will compare Descartes' definition of a self, which is just a thinking thing, to John Locke's definition of a self.